The following document was recovered from the archived records of the Valeth Institute. Its contents have been preserved as they appeared when the investigation was closed. Archive 1, Case File 006. Classification, Axiom. The machine had been sitting in Institute storage for 68 years before anyone thought to switch it on. It was found among uncatalogued equipment removed from an older facility scheduled for closure in June 2026. Nothing in the inventory explained why it had been preserved. A brass plate carried the name Elias Voss and the year 1958, while a faded card tied to the frame described it as a mechanical coordinate processor. Project Axiom received it because the mechanism appeared to have been designed for mathematical work. 6 counters surrounded a plotting surface where a jointed arm held a graphite stylus above a roll of paper. There was no camera, antenna, or external sensor, and no obvious means for the machine to obtain geographical information. Restoration took 3 days. When power was supplied on June 14th, the counters began turning before anyone had entered a calculation, and within seconds, the plotting arm started moving. Several of the first drawings resembled historical maps. One showed a railway station in northern England with platforms and service buildings demolished in 1987. Voss had worked nearby while those structures were still standing, which suggested that the machine might contain some form of geographical archive. A later drawing made that difficult to maintain. It showed a residential district outside Prague, with a road dividing around a rectangular building before joining again. The arrangement appeared in municipal plans from 1931, when engineers had proposed building a public library on the site. Funding was withdrawn before construction began, and neither the library nor the road around it was ever built. Yet both appeared on Voss's map as completed structures. Archive services located his surviving papers that afternoon. Most consisted of calculations and folded maps containing details that disagreed with the places named on them. In one notebook, Voss had underlined a sentence twice. "A map records where something is. I am interested in where else it could have been." One of the notebooks also contained the settings used for the machine. Axiom reproduced them and allowed the next drawing to finish without interruption. The result showed a mountainous region surrounding a narrow valley, with a river following its eastern side and a rectangular structure marked near a break in the rock. Voss had dated the map August 17, 1959, although nothing in his notes identified the location. The Institute's visual archive did. Project Atlas returned a match to material from Case File 005. The proportions corresponded to the stone structure photographed during Mercer's Himalayan expedition in April 1998, and investigated again 28 years later. Voss had recorded it 39 years before Mercer reached the valley. A search of his remaining material uncovered 23 maps of the same region, produced over several months in 1959. The mountains, river, and surrounding terrain remained consistent, while the structure changed slightly between observations. The final map was different enough that Axiom initially cataloged it separately. Behind the structure, where the earlier drawings showed only mountain terrain, Voss had mapped several roads extending into a group of buildings. The date in the corner was December 19th, 1959. Someone had written beneath it in pencil, "First stable observation." The phrase appeared on 7 more maps in Voss's collection, all produced between December 1959 and February 1960. Once Axiom arranged them by date, the scattered lines behind the stone structure began forming a consistent geography. Roads returned in the same positions, buildings kept their dimensions, and a broad avenue extended for almost 3 kilometers before dividing around a circular complex. By February, Voss was mapping a city. Atlas had seen portions of the same architecture during Case File 005, although the 2026 expedition had encountered damaged structures during brief periods of instability. Voss's drawings showed them intact, connected by streets and elevated walkways that continued far beyond the area Atlas had observed. His notebooks contained little speculation about the city itself. Voss was more interested in why his machine could register structures that remained invisible when the valley was observed normally. He compared the effect to two radio broadcasts passing through the same room, where a receiver tuned to one station could remain completely unaware of the other. He suspected physical space might behave in much the same way. Most locations he tested produced occasional fragments that disappeared from later measurements. The valley behaved differently. Once the additional geography appeared, the machine could follow it for hours and return to the same streets on subsequent days. Axiom reconstructed his most complete map from 6 surviving sheets. The stone structure stood near the outer edge of the city, opening onto an avenue that descended toward a dense central district. 3 towers bordered the avenue farther south, while an enormous circular structure occupied higher ground beyond them. Voss numbered the buildings and left no indication that he understood their purpose. Several pages contained another set of measurements that archive services had originally cataloged as calibration work. 3 circles appeared beside the calculations, changing position between observations. Their movement allowed Axiom to determine that Voss had been tracking 3 large natural satellites above the city.
Project Mnemonic was contacted that afternoon. Case file 003 had closed in October 2022 without establishing where the place existed or how the children had obtained information about it. Children in 6 countries had described the same environment, including a city beneath 3 moons. The comparison reached beyond the skyline. Several children had described elevated stairways crossing between buildings, and those structures appeared throughout Voss's central district. An 8-year-old girl had also drawn 3 towers along a broad avenue and insisted that the middle tower stood farther away, despite appearing almost the same height as the other 2. Voss's measurements showed that the middle tower was nearly twice as tall. Those maps had been sealed in Institute storage since 1961.
The comparison raised a problem that Voss himself had apparently encountered. His machine had taken months of adjustment before the city appeared with any consistency, while children separated by thousands of kilometers had described the same place without instruments or training. Among his geographical records, Axiom found a thin folder dated March 1960. It contained a series of perception experiments conducted only weeks after his maps of the city became stable. Voss had shown the same visual material to adults and children, then recorded what each group claimed to have seen. Across the first page, he had written, "If the machine can register it, why can't we?"
Voss began the perception experiments with 42 volunteers from families living near his research facility. Their ages ranged from 5 to 58, with enough children included for him to compare the results across different stages of development. The volunteers were shown images for several seconds at a time and asked to reproduce what they remembered. Most depicted ordinary rooms, streets, or landscapes. Others combined familiar scenes with fragments of the second geography recorded by Voss's machine. The difference appeared almost immediately. Adults usually reproduced the familiar surroundings and omitted the additional structures, while younger children included them far more often. In one experiment, Voss combined an empty courtyard with the outline of a staircase detected at the same location by his machine. 26 adults drew the courtyard without it. 7 of the 9 children included the staircase, and 2 extended it beyond the section they had been shown. Those extensions matched measurements Voss had recorded earlier. His work gradually shifted toward the way human perception develops. Voss believed that seeing involved more than receiving information through the eyes. The brain continuously compared sensory input with an internal understanding of the world, resolving contradictions before they reached conscious awareness.
A doorway could not open into a space larger than the building around it, and two different structures could not occupy the same ground. By adulthood, expectations like these had been reinforced throughout a lifetime. Children were still learning them, which led Voss to suspect that a developing brain might retain contradictory information that an adult brain would discard before it became a stable memory. One sentence appeared several times in his later notes. Perception is corrected before it is remembered. Axiom returned to case file 003. The children investigated in 2022 had described the unknown city as something they remembered, even though none could establish when they had experienced it. Nemazany had therefore treated memory as the unexplained part of the phenomenon. Voss's experiments suggested that the unusual event may have occurred earlier. If the children had perceived fragments of the city during periods when its second geography became accessible, their memories required no separate mechanism. Their age may simply have allowed information rejected by mature perception to remain long enough to be remembered. This also changed the meaning of the drawings. The children were never necessarily more exposed to the phenomenon than everyone around them. They may only have been less efficient at removing it. Axiom entered the finding into the Case 003 cross-reference on June 21st. The conclusion carried an implication that extended well beyond the city. If Voss was correct, human beings could spend their entire lives receiving information from other accessible configurations of reality without ever becoming conscious of it. Such information would not need to be invisible or hidden from the senses, because the brain itself could remove whatever failed to fit the world it had learned to expect. Archive Services completed the digitization of Voss's final notebook later that evening. The remaining pages covered his observations of the city through the end of 1960 and into January 1961, when the consistency he had spent months establishing began to deteriorate. Buildings shifted between maps. Streets changed length, while sections that had remained stable throughout the previous year began appearing in conflicting positions. Voss traced the first changes to the enormous complex overlooking the city, which he had catalogued as Structure 91. Beside the first altered map, he had written, "Something has changed at Structure 91. The pages that followed contained almost no geographical measurements. In their place, the machine had recorded a sequence of numbers.
The change in Voss's records began on January 17, 1961, less than 6 hours after he first noted unusual activity around Structure 91. Until then, the machine had produced geographical measurements. That evening, it began printing groups of numbers at regular intervals. Voss spent most of the night copying the output into his notebook, where he identified prime number intervals, hydrogen frequencies, and several physical constants. Axiom compared the surviving pages with Project Echo's records. The pattern matched the transmission received at Observatory K-17 in November 1998 and detected again in November 2025. The oldest evidence known during the K-17 investigation had been a magnetic tape dated March 3, 1973. Voss's record moved the history of the signal back another 12 years. Over the following days, the changes around Structure 91 spread into the surrounding districts. Streets that had remained fixed for months shifted between observations. Buildings appeared in conflicting positions, and sections of the city no longer aligned with Voss's earlier maps. On January 26th, the numerical output changed. Voss separated the new pages from the earlier sequence and filled their margins with calculations. His notes never explained what distinction he believed he had found, although one word appeared across the first sheet: response. The instability increased over the next 3 days. Roads changed length between consecutive measurements, buildings moved across the coordinate grid, and the stone structure at the outer edge of the city appeared in different positions during the same observation.
Late on January 28th, the machine stopped producing usable measurements and remained inactive through the night. Shortly after sunrise, the plotting arm began moving again. Voss allowed it to complete a full survey before removing the paper. Large sections of the city were gone. Elevated walkways ended over empty ground, streets disappeared among collapsed structures, and the district surrounding the broad avenue had been reduced to ruins. Axiom compared the drawing with the analog photograph recovered during Case File 005. The Great Arch occupied the same position beyond the thoroughfare. The avenue passed through it toward 3 distant towers, while the surrounding structures followed the layout Atlas had observed during the 11-second overlap in May 2026. Voss's earlier maps showed the district intact. The machine remained in operation into February, although none of the surviving sheets contained another complete view of the city. His notebook ended without explaining what had happened during the hours when its measurements failed. Case File 006 was closed on July 3, 2026. The machine was transferred to restricted storage, and its numerical records were placed under Project Echo. 2 days later, Archive Services found a loose sheet inside the back cover of Voss's final notebook. It contained measurements taken on the morning of January 29th. Alongside the ruined geography, Voss had recorded the second numerical sequence until it finally disappeared from the machine. The sequence he had labeled response remained measurable for 17 minutes after the city could no longer be mapped. Echo cross-referenced the duration with the original K-17 records. In November 1998, the observatory's internal system had begun recording the signal 17 minutes before its instruments registered the transmission arriving. No explanation for the correspondence appeared in either record.
In July 2026, while Project Echo was reviewing Voss's numerical records, an Archive 0 reference appeared in the search results. The first response. The same title was listed in Mercer's 1998 Valley Report. After returning from beyond the structure, Mercer had submitted several pages under that heading, and the material was later transferred to Archive 0. The reference was checked because Voss had used the word response in his own notebook 37 years earlier. The Archive 0 register showed that Mercer's pages had been added on May 4, 1998. Beside the entry was an older reference number that did not belong to the Valley investigation. Archive Services retrieved the original register. The first response was already listed there. The first pages had entered Archive 0 years before Mercer's expedition. Their case number and source were absent from the surviving index, but the file had remained restricted and had never been closed. Mercer's material was entered beneath the earlier record. A note beside the 1998 edition read, "Further material received from Valley Expedition." Nothing else had been written beside it. The earlier pages remain restricted. No accessible record identifies who submitted them or where they were recovered.